From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Hello and welcome back. Our guest today is John Schindler from The Observer. John, welcome.
Great to be here, thank you.
And on that note, I suppose that we shall get to our first issue, which is issue 1, So Long, Syria.
I want to get out. I want to bring our troops back home. I want to start rebuilding our nation.
Shocking members of Congress this week. President Trump ordered the Pentagon to draw up plans to withdraw the U.S. military forces from Syria. The president says the withdrawal is now justified due to the near defeat of the Islamic State or ISIS terrorist group. Still, the decision renders a major shift in U.S. policy. The Trump administration had previously pledged to retain the approximately 2,000 U.S. military personnel deployed in Syria in that nation until ISIS was defeated and 4 other conditions achieved. These being the restraint of Iranian influence in Syria, the transition of Bashar al-Assad from power, the repatriation of displaced Syrians, and the dismantling of Syria's chemical weapons program. What now for those conditions? Well, the president says it is up to the United Nations and wealthy Sunni Arab states in the region.
Question, Pat, is President Trump making the same mistake President Obama made in 2011, prematurely withdrawing from Iraq?
No, in Syria, if the objective was to overthrow Assad, come in and reconstruct things, that war is over. The Russians, Syrians, the Iranians, Hezbollah, they basically won the war. What the United States has got with the Kurds, about 1/4 of the country, we're going to try to trade it for some kind of influence, maybe I don't know exactly what we assume we're going to get, because we're uninvited there, we're unwelcome, we are unwanted. I think you got a real crunch coming here, Tom, between Mr. Trump, who would like to get out of the forever war, and the Pentagon and other folks who think we're going to have to soldier on.
Eleanor.
Well, it's tempting to say, let's get out and cut our losses, but we do have moral and political obligations in that area. Just last week, a U.S. service person was killed. And this looks more like an unplanned retreat than a planned withdrawal. He just pops off. This is a serious issue. It should be explored, options put on the table, not just because he feels like doing it one day, and you see the pushback from the Defense Secretary Mattis. We have a commander-in-chief who makes these off-the-cuff comments, and then we have the military basically pretending they didn't really hear, and nothing will happen for at least 6 months, and then he'll have another sort of temper tantrum. So I don't see this having serious policy implications.
Yeah, I think we do run the risk of repeating the Iraq in 2011 fiasco. But let me say, the U.S. government in both administrations now has never had a particularly coherent policy on the Syrian civil war. And the real walkback came in 2013 when Obama abandoned his own red line. And let's be honest, in effect, outsourced our policy in Syria to Vladimir Putin and to Moscow, who have now won. The Assad regime has won the war. The rest is details which may be catastrophic in humanitarian terms, but these are details strategically speaking. The war is over.
Right.
Well, if I dared to part of John McLaughlin were here, he would say you have a keen grasp of the obvious. Because indeed, you're right. We haven't had a policy from the beginning, and the whole region now is being given over to Putin, and there's really nobody reversing that or even seeing a reversal on the horizon, whether from the U.S. or from Europe. And it's a landscape now in which withdrawal is never easy. Donald Trump says, we're going to withdraw very quickly. He has no idea what he's talking about. Even 2,000 is going to take a while.
One of the reasons, look, whether you like it or not, the Russians, the Iranians, Hezbollah, the Shia, to them this is vital, this is important, they shed blood.
And to the Israelis though, right?
Well, the Israelis haven't shed any blood in there, and neither have our Saudi friends. They want Uncle Sam to come in and do it again, and that's where the crunch is going to come, when Uncle Sam doesn't do it.
Well, Republicans were so quick to criticize Obama for getting out of Iraq, and that was a planned withdrawal that was negotiated by President George W. Bush. And I think Obama said we shouldn't be involved in Syria, that's in somebody else's civil war. But the fact is we are involved. And I think if you're going to get out, it has to be given some considerable thought and planning.
Very quick ending point. It makes no sense, however, to talk about killing the Iran deal and getting into hot water with Iran while at the same time pulling out of Syria.
I think we're all agreed on that. That
makes
too.
no sense.
Absolutely.
All right. We will go on to our next issue. Issue 2, penchant for problems.
I hope he's going to be great.
President Trump hopes he'll be great, but Scott Pruitt, head of the Environmental Protection Agency, seems to have a penchant for problems.
How we do business.
This week,
As you know,
Pruitt entertained a series of mini
President
scandals.
Trump did
First, the Washington Post reported that the EPA had considered leasing a private jet for Pruitt at a cost of $100,000 per month. Pruitt has previously been criticized for his use of first-class flights. Next came the news that two top Pruitt political appointees had been given big salary raises. Then came the resignation of Samantha Davis, a senior advisor to Pruitt and a focus for controversy. While Pruitt denies responsibility for these considerations, they follow last week's report by ABC News that Pruitt had leased a Washington, D.C. condo owned by the wife of an energy lobbyist. Still, not everyone is against the EPA administrator. Many conservatives laud Pruitt for rolling back what they describe as extreme regulations that damage business competitiveness.
Eleanor, should Pruitt be fired?
Yes. He has dreams of imperial grandeur, and I think the one good thing that comes out of this is he will never be Attorney General, which was his next step on his
Trump says
climb.
that's fake news.
Maybe it was always fake news. Yeah, but the way he's dismantled the climate agenda that President Obama put in place. I mean, he's risking the health of the planet for his own
and
personal
that Donald Trump was
wonderment.
elected to undo. Look, this is the MVP in the cabinet as far as I'm concerned.
Okay,
And the
you
fact,
can have him.
$50 a night for a room, that's about $17,000 or $18,000 a year, which was a lot of money when I was growing up. But no, I think he is outstanding. I'll tell you this, the conservatives are rising up to stand by this guy. I agree he's made some foolish decision, but your crowd, Eleanor, has been trying to get that guy from day one.
Keep him in place. Corruption is something the American people understand. Russian collusion is confusing. Great issue for the November midterms. If he can hang on by his fingernails that long.
Well, Pat is certainly expressing a commonly held view among Republicans. Pruitt is doing what he was put in that job to do, dismantling the EPA, dismantling the one segment of the Nixonian agenda, the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, that liberals like.
Nixon, the creator of the EPA. Yeah, that's right.
Exactly. And this creates, depending on how excited liberals get about this, it could be an important
We're excited.
issue next
We're
year.
excited.
Partisan politics aside, Pruitt may be too corrupt for the Trump administration, which is saying a lot. Well, Fox News this weekend is reporting some of his excesses, which should be a tell that I'm not sure the GOP is going to go to the mat for him. It may have gone too far.
Well, the Fox News interview that Ed Henry did, which Pruitt thought would save him, Henry was very tough on him, appropriately so. I think that killed him.
So I don't think everyone's going to the mat here.
Well, look, the guy has done an outstanding job. Who has been, you might disagree, who's been more effective from the standpoint of conservatism in the whole cabinet than Pruitt? Right. And look, you don't abandon all your guys when they stumble and make a mistake.
Well, these aren't stumbles, these are deliberate efforts to rip off the taxpayers, and that is not a conservative value.
Wait, Eleanor, don't you think, though, that the reason some liberals want to get rid of him, though, is not about the scandals, it's because he's too good?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
No, I hate him on policy grounds.
Right. Okay.
But hey, if all this ethical stuff was enough to get out Shulkin from the VA, why isn't it enough to get this guy out? He's egregiously defiled the public service.
Yeah, I want to see if the Cuyahoga River catches on fire again before November. Remind people of how things were before the EPA came along.
Okay. On that note, we will get to our next issue. Issue 3, trade war.
The US and Chinese governments stepped closer to a trade war this week when China introduced new tariffs on more than 100 US goods. The US industries targeted by China include the agriculture and aircraft sectors. Still, Beijing says it is only responding to US plans to introduce new tariffs on Chinese goods. Regardless, the markets, which lost hundreds of points this week over fears that the trade showdown will ripple into the broader economy, are worried.
John, are we heading for a trade war? Or are we in one?
I think we're in one, and I think the president has said this is no big deal. I think we're going to find out that's not true. And let me say, I think it's great and long overdue that we're finally taking on the Chinese over stuff like intellectual property theft. But that has to be done in a multilateral way with the WTO, and that is exactly what Trump has turned his back on, unfortunately. So this is not going to go well at all.
We lose, you think?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, this is already killing Trump in the heartland. And the Chinese have, pardon me, the Trump card. They hold our debt. Are we really going to get into a trade war with somebody who's our banker?
Last year, The Chinese sold us $500 billion worth of goods, and we sold them 125. They had a $375 billion trade surplus. We're transferring our wealth, our money, our factories, our jobs over there, and there's no doubt about it. If you're going to fight the Chinese, the people are going to have to make sacrifices.
Right.
If we're not willing to do it, your sovereignty goes down the tubes. Your
So you
economic
say double down.
independence.
You say double down, do you?
Which
No, what I'd
people-
say, I would have fought it differently than the way they're fighting it. but
That's
I'll
a cop
back-
out.
No, I back Trump. Okay.
You know, it's a complicated issue, as they say. But the thing about tariffs is that they each have winners and losers. Whatever move you make, and if we do it too drastically, we see what's happened to Wall Street this past week. They don't like instability, and that's what it looks like. Meanwhile, you have Trump making his off-the-cuff comments, followed by Larry Kudlow coming out and saying what he really means is, and then you have Mnuchin coming out. Yeah, what he really means is. We got two different policies. One is Trump's policy. One is the Trump administration.
Okay.
Which one do we have today?
All right, mid-seg coming up, the dragon and the bear.
Tariffs weren't the only focus of Chinese foreign policy this week. Visiting Moscow for meetings with the Russian defense minister, China's new defense minister told reporters that America should bear close heed to the two nations' increasing military cooperation.
Moscow and Beijing, real alliance or not?
No, and it never will be a real alliance because of too much history, including during the Cold War, very recent. But I think we should be very alarmed that we are putting both Beijing and Moscow in a situation where their interests are overlapping sufficiently in important areas to cause strategic problems for us.
You know,
and
the
that
great
is in
thing-
part by our choices.
A great thing Nixon did was what? He separated China from Russia, and then Reagan made Russia basically a friend, and the post-Cold War generation has blown both of them. They're forcing the Russian, I know everybody hates Putin, you're forcing him into the only alternative he's got, which is the embrace of China, which I agree with you, is not its natural ally.
Right.
Yeah, but Trump views all of this trade stuff so simplistically. He thinks if we have a trade imbalance, they're winning and we're losing. And globalized trade doesn't work that way. China assembles a lot of products with parts that come from Korea and from Japan, who are our allies. And so they're going to get hurt in this fight too.
6 million manufacturing jobs in the first decade of this century. That's not a loss.
Do you believe that what he's doing now, as in meaning
you know,
Mr. Trump, is going to bring back those factories?
You're-
No
to
way.
get-
You're fighting.
To get our economic independence cost us decades and almost a century to get the kind of independence where we stood up alone in the whole world. They could all be at war and we had no problems. That's what we've given away.
Well, it's not quite doomsday, Pat. I mean,
Well, your economic
every one of these
independence is
treaties,
gone.
You know, it cuts both ways. You know, we've got areas of the country that had growth as a result of these policies,
Sure.
and we've had other areas that have been hurt. But we need to look at this comprehensively and not just picking and
Whereas
choosing.
we got
which
trade
something-
Wait, let's let John in.
Yeah.
Pat, I'm going to put a grenade on the table and pull the pin. What if Nixon opened to the wrong communist country?
Well, listen, Reagan took care of
Taking the
Russia.
long view, taking the
Look,
long
I was
view.
with Reagan at the end of his term, the evil empire. He was walking through Red Square being patted on the back by Russians.
Yep.
So
I'm
this
just
all
saying,
comes down
the
to
road not taken.
It all
Trump is right.
Right.
Trump is right in being nice
No,
to
I mean,
to
the
Putin.
approach, I don't necessarily agree with the approach, but if you're going to get your economic independence back, maybe you don't give a hoot about it.
We
but
have
you're gonna take some
allies. We have
sacrifices.
allies, and not everybody has to manufacture steel up to World War II strength. You
I
know,
mean, what do you got? 19. I mean, of the 19 largest steel producers in the world, we got about 2 of them now. That's the USA.
But John, do
we-
you think
we
though
do
that the concern though is that this will raise the living costs of Americans,
Absolutely.
right? Because of tariffs, and you think
Absolutely.
that will come back and blow back against Trump?
Well, I think it could impact a lot of Trump voters when they go to their Walmart and discover most of it is
Sure,
made
we're
in China.
consumer
There is
or-
going to be a cost here.
We're a consumer-oriented
Undeniably.
society, Tom, and the Chinese are looking to the long term. They're forcing sacrifices on their people that Americans won't make
the
anymore.
Chinese economy is also evolving, and they're turning into an enormous consumer market that American corporations don't want to forego and see it go to. Already they're,
And you
they're
think they're gonna
buying their
let us in
soybeans
there the
from
way we
Brazil.
let them in here?
Already they're buying their soybeans from Brazil and Argentina, and the farmers are really
High-tech
hurting.
soybeans.
China has problems with wage growth, though.
And most
Absolutely.
of China's soybeans come from outside of China, and now instead of buying from us, they're going to buy them from Brazil.
Exactly.
That
Where
doesn't
are
help
the
us.
high-tech big manufacturing jobs of the future going. Farming, we're the greatest country in the world, no doubt about it.
All right.
But soybeans aren't high tech.
All right. Enough of this soybean silliness.
It costs money,
Soybean
though.
silliness. When we come back, the human wall and Hanoi hellos. And tell your friends that they can watch us at McLaughlin.com. And we would love it if they did, because that's very important for us. Anytime from Sunday, 1 p.m. But we will be right back in a minute. And from that point, we will continue a wonderful discussion with this incredibly energetic panel. See you in a second.
The McLaughlin Group is brought to you in part by Eric.org. With gridlock in Washington, states are stepping in to mandate paid sick and family leave policies, creating a compliance nightmare for companies with a nationwide workforce. The ERISA Industry Committee is fighting back. Learn how we can help your company at Eric.org.
Issue 4, the human wall.
President Trump this week authorized the deployment of National Guard forces to secure the U.S. southern border with Mexico. The president says the action is necessary to prevent illegal immigrants from taking advantage of what he says is an insufficiently protected border. Democrats disagree. They say that this is a White House ploy to distract from the president's failure to win funding for his much-vaunted border wall.
Clarence, a sensible step or militarization?
Theater. That's what this is, theater. I just have to chuckle when I see Trump doing exactly what Bush and Obama did, send in some National Guard to back up our Border Patrol folks down there with their detection devices, et cetera, and make it sound like he's building the wall. In fact, he told the crowd on one or two occasions that we're building the wall now. We're not. We have some prototypes down there,
John.
but it's not happening.
No, I mean Trump has finally realized there was never going to be a wall. It's a totally impractical idea. The Pentagon wants nothing to do with it. I think he actually has done something rather clever in an animal cunning way. And this buys off some of his base with, look, we're doing something about the border at least. But as you said, it's something that Bush 43 and Obama
it will
did.
have any effect?
And the left is losing their minds over this militarization. And it's nothing new.
Can it have
actually.
tactical effect?
Modest, very modest.
Modest.
And you know, Tom, there is an element of ad hoc, no doubt about it. But look, in the longer term, the border of the United States with Mexico is far more important than the borders of the Baltics, which we're defending, the border of South Korea, which we're defending, border of Kuwait, which we're defending. One day, because the existence of the United States as an independent, unique, separate country is contingent upon securing that border.
It's not
contingent
on building a wall.
Securing the Med,
This is
as
not
much
a
as
crisis.
securing the Med is going to decide the fate of Europe.
But do you need a wall to secure the border? No.
This is
That's
many
not
parts.
this
You do
is-
need
That's
a
why
wall.
I say it's theater. Well, we got them. We got them in those parts.
This is not a crisis. Border crossings and apprehensions are at the lowest in 40 years. He is revving this up.
300,000 a
He's
year?
revving it up because he's losing his grip on his base, and he's got to, rev up the music machine whenever he feels he's
when you
losing
tilt the
votes.
balance of a population a certain way, you will never get the border secured. And when that happens, it's the end of the good old USA.
It's not happening.
It'll take a couple of days. Oh, it's
I've
happening right
been hearing
now.
this for decades.
I know, it's going to be after you and I are gone.
You know what's
Clarence.
happening? While you and I are here, a lot of those immigrants are paying for our Social Security right
what
now.
are the
the fact is
Well, what is
that
a
we
hotter
already
issue for the American people now than border wall, border security? And it wasn't an issue
hotter
back
issue.
in '92, was it?
It's a hot issue for Trump supporters, but you are right, Pat. When you were talking about the Buchanan fence back in the 90s, I thought you were nuts, but you're right. Donald Trump rode all the way to the White House
Well,
with
we
that
thought
issue.
you were nuts,
a
Clarence.
minority of people.
Do you still think each other are nuts? No.
It elected Trump in 2016.
Why?
It won't
Right.
elect him in 2020.
It is the issue. It's with us
All right.
forever.
I'm going to throw a
it's
curveball in here.
It's a hype issue.
John, what do you think about Kevin Williamson?
Well,
that's a little curveball.
Kevin Williamson is a fine writer. I love his stuff. He's made some very extreme comments on more than one occasion.
Do you think it's an indictment of liberalism?
They wanted him gone. He's given them plenty of ammunition to be gone.
He wants
This is not
women who've had an
comfortable.
abortion
Oh, I know,
hanged.
it's crazy.
Should he have been fired from the Atlantic, though?
I think that's a decision that they made for their editorial.
Do you
He
agree
went
with it,
over the
Eleanor?
line. I would have fired him too. Sure.
Really? Okay.
He's got
Clarence.
plenty of other outlets he can
Did
write
the
for.
Atlantic not have
That's like
Google?
Clarence.
I think
No, really.
I think it was too much of a gray area for them to have hired him in the first place. But I think this is not a First Amendment issue. We got to clarify that.
No.
Government has nothing to do with this. We're talking about editorial decisions internally.
Typical liberal magazine decision.
All right. On that note, we'll get to issue 5, the Hanoi factor.
In a historic first visit earlier this month, a U.S. Navy carrier strike group made a port call to Da Nang, Vietnam, landing site for the first U.S. ground forces that entered Vietnam in 1965. But these days, Da Nang symbolizes growing U.S.-Vietnamese cooperation against Chinese efforts to militarize the South China Sea. China has claimed a vast swathes of that sea and, as indicated by your moderator's red circles, is reinforcing and even constructing fortified islands that it might one day use to limit access through these international waters. Still, the U.S. carrier visit isn't the only symbol of Washington and Hanoi's growing friendship. Just this week, the U.S. government provided new patrol boats to Vietnam. Trade is also increasing. While the U.S. runs a significant trade deficit with Vietnam, U.S. exports to Vietnam quadrupled between 2007 and 2017 and now stand at over $8 billion a year.
$8 billion a year. That actually, I have to do a couple of corrections there. This was last month. But John, is this a big step forward?
This is a big step forward, and this is a long time in coming. This has been worked on for years between Hanoi and Washington, and this is a potential strategic game changer. To counter a rising China in the South China Sea and across the region, Vietnam is an absolutely vital player. And this is a fascinating thing to watch, the last wounds being healed, and I desperately hope that Senator John McCain, who's not a well man, lives long enough to do the ribbon cutting of the reopening of U.S. Naval Station Cameron Bay, because it's coming.
Well,
wow, okay.
The Carl Vinson, the carrier out there is fine. I think the improved relations with Vietnam are fine. But we are not going to take back the Paracel Islands that Vietnam has lost to China in the South China Sea.
What about the Spratly Islands?
Nor should we take, they're not our islands. The Philippines won't fight for them. The Vietnamese, if they want them back, tell them to fight for them.
What about if the Chinese stop the trade flows?
If the Chinese will not interfere with international trade, then you do something.
All right, Eleanor.
Well, this is not an abrupt Trump administration U-turn. This is, as you point out, has been a goal that Obama administration was working toward. I think it's a very good thing, and it's part of trying to isolate China. A better thing that Trump should have done was to stick with that TPP, that Trans-Pacific Trade Organization, which was excluded China, and instead China's now making trade relationships with all those other countries, and the U.S. is on the outs.
Well, as someone who was drafted into the Vietnam War and had doubts about the domino theory, no bone spurs, thank you very much, and who had doubts about the domino theory at that time. Now we see Vietnam. The Vietnamese wanted liberation from colonization, and now they are one of the most productive countries.
They are very pro-capitalist.
They're still communists.
They're still communists.
But the people are very pro-capitalist.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so would you station the 7th Fleet there? Would you move them out of Japan?
I certainly think we need to think about shifting assets down. And I want to counterpoint on one issue. I don't want to go to war with China over the Spratlys either, but the reality is the U.S. Navy has been an important player in the waters off East Asia since Dewey won the Battle of Manila Bay in 1898. I mean, this is not some new thing. And I hope we can accommodate this peacefully.
We do not
we're not going to pull away.
We do not want a military alliance with Vietnam like we have with South Korea.
We're
going to fight for Vietnam?
No.
I mean, that's what it implies.
Vietnam's history is mostly resisting
They're going to fight. When was the last time?
Right. Yeah, China and Vietnam are sort of historic enemies.
3,000.
So we can take advantage of that.
We are seeing the possibility of proxy war there between Russia, the U.S., and China. The competition now, Duterte over in the Philippines, making overtures to Putin.
He's an interesting fellow, isn't he?
Yeah.
Colorful.
Colorful.
Thank you.
All right.
Good anti-drug policy.
We'll be right back with predictions. But here is a little something from 24 years ago when I was just 6 years old.
Issue 3, winners and losers. Who are the big winners and the big losers of the '94 elections, besides the obvious ones, that is? The losers first. Pat Buchanan.
I think Joycelyn Elders better get a bus ticket back to Arkansas, John. That's one. And the second one is Janet Reno. I think she's in real trouble, and you could get congressional hearings on what happened at Waco.
Eleanor.
Bad news.
Well, if 2 years ago was the year of the woman, this was the year of the conservative white male, which is why Patches picked 2 women as his big losers.
The McLaughlin Group is brought to you in part by Eric.org. Is your company trying to provide health and retirement benefits to workers across the country? The ERISA Industry Committee beats back taxes, mandates, and compliance burdens that make it harder for companies to provide employee benefits. Learn how ERIC supports large employers at eric.org.
Generation Hope is a nonprofit organization that helps DC area teen moms and dads become college graduates. We provide them with tuition assistance, one-on-one mentoring, and crisis support until they graduate. Crises along the way. There have already been a lot of crises.
My mom passed away, and I do everything for my mom in memory of her. I dedicate this graduation to her on Mother's Day.
When a young parent earns their college degree, the likelihood that that child will go to college goes up, and they will earn $1 million more over the course of their lifetime.
Naraya Omar.
It's a tremendous return on investment. And all of these issues that we care about, homelessness, child welfare, poverty, this really makes a difference, and it changes lives.
Congratulations. Have a wonderful weekend.
Predictions, Pat.
May 15th, a huge day. We decide on whether the Iran nuclear deal goes down. 70th anniversary of the birth of Israel. American embassy is being moved to Jerusalem. There may be a little bit of activity over there that day.
Eleanor.
Thanks to President Trump's admission that he knew nothing about a non-disclosure agreement, Stormy Daniels' case that it's not valid is likely to prevail, and she can tell her story anytime. And the president's lawyer, Michael Cohen, now becomes a central figure for Robert Mueller, both on the Stormy Daniels illegal payment front and also the fact that he was exploring financial deals in Moscow for the Trump organization.
John. This week, the Mueller inquiry into the president's Kremlin ties claimed its first scalp. Alex van der Swan, a Dutch attorney, admitted he lied to the FBI and got a prison sentence. This is the first of many. There are many more coming. Many more are coming.
Clarence.
The Tea Party's had a bit of a revival in revolt against Trump and the omnibus spending bill that he signed. And so I expect to see more pushes for some kind of rollback on that spending over the next few months.
Interesting. Okay. I predict that President Trump will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal in mid-May. That'll be interesting. If you want to know what the aftermath will be, however, read my Washington Examiner piece from Thursday. And here's a random fact. The Red River Campaign ended 154 years ago today when General Nathaniel Banks' Union forces were defeated by the Confederacy at the Battle of Mansfield. The Union campaign had sought to secure a Union stronghold along the Gulf Coast of southern Louisiana. It didn't work, though. Thank you, panelists, and thank you all for watching. We hope you will join us next week, but until then, make sure to follow us on Twitter at McLaughlin Group and visit McLaughlin.com, where your friends can watch this show. Ila liqa, which is goodbye in Arabic.